Dry Creek wasn't much more than a stretch of dust between two ridges and a saloon that smelled like fried lard and lonely talk. On a May evening when thunder threatened but never came, the door of the Oxbow Tavern slammed open, and silence slipped out like a scared dog. Three miners stood around a table where a woman had placed her boy behind her and a knife with a carved N in front of her. The blade was steady, point glinting under lamplight. Her voice carried across the room like a cracked hymn. "Touch him again, and I'll carve your apology into this oak myself." Nobody in Dry Creek had seen Lila Hart before, that night boots muddy, sleeves torn, eyes that didn't flinch. Her boy Finn, 7 maybe, held her skirt tight, chin up the way kids do when they've already learned adults break faster than promises. That was when Ezra Cole stepped in tall, dust on his coat, hat shadowing a face that had seen too many battlefields and not enough grace. He didn't draw his gun. He simply looked at the men and said, in that low, measured timbre, every cowboy learns from wind and solitude. "Evening. Problem here sounds like it needs writing down." The tallest miner spat. "Ain't your business, cowboy." Ezra's boots scraped forward once, deliberate. "It is when you scare a child." He pulled a folded paper from his coat, blank receipt from the supply post, and laid it beside Lila's knife. "You're going to write your names in the words, 'We were wrong.' You'll nail it to that post outside where the sun can bleach your shame. Then you'll leave Dry Creek before it finishes drying your bones." The men laughed the way men laugh when they're halfway to scared. But the knife never trembled, and Lila's eyes never dropped. Ezra's voice stayed calm, iron underneath silk. "Pick up the pencil." One finally did. The graphite scratched slow, uneven. Another followed. The last man hesitated till Finn whispered, "Barely a breath, sir?" And somehow that broke him. He signed. Ezra folded the note, slipped it into the miner's pocket. "Hang it yourself, so folks know who fixed what they broke." Outside, wind lifted dust. A hammer rang once, twice. Justice posted. Inside, Lila's hand shook only after it was over. She wiped the blade on her skirt, slid it back into its sheath. "Ma'am," Ezra started, tipping his hat. "Don't call me ma'am," she cut in, voice raw. Then softer, almost weary. "And don't fall in love with me." Ezra's mouth twitched, not smile, not smirk. Something caught between respect and ache. "Too late," he said. "I fell when you called me sir." A murmur rolled through the tavern, half laughter, half disbelief. Lila looked at him like someone testing daylight after too many storms. For the first time, she exhaled. "We don't owe you." "Good," Ezra replied. "I'm allergic to debts. They make freedom taste like rust." He turned toward the door, then paused. "There's a dry stable out back. If you and the boy need a roof till morning, it leaks less than most." Finn tugged his mother's sleeve. "Please, Ma." Lila hesitated, eyes flicking from the nailed confession outside to the stranger's calm silhouette. "We'll manage," she said, though her voice sounded unsure. Ezra tipped his hat again. "You already did." He stepped into the wind, boots sinking into the same dust that swallowed every promise this side of the Rockies. Inside, the tavern breathed again. The knife gleamed dull on the table, catching the lamplight. The boy stared at it, then at the door where the cowboy had gone, and asked quietly, "He gonna come back?" Lila didn't answer. She just looked at the window where the nailed paper fluttered, white against the dark, like a flag someone had finally decided to raise instead of burn. That was the first night Dry Creek learned what kind of woman Lila Hart was, and what kind of man still walked the West when decency meant drawing lines with a steady hand instead of a gun. By the time night folded over Dry Creek, thunder had rolled north and left the valley still as a held breath. The lantern above the Oxbow Inn door swayed on its chain, humming softly, light spilling across the porch where Ezra Cole stood, hat in hand. Inside, the air smelled of beans left too long on the stove and floorboards washed with cheap whiskey. May Cantrell, the innkeeper's wife, was a round woman with flour on her hands and eyes sharp enough to size a man's intentions before he spoke. She stopped kneading dough long enough to glance at the pair behind Ezra, a woman and a boy, travel-stiff, wary, carrying everything they owned in a threadbare saddlebag. "Rooms are full," May said, voice not unkind, just cautious. "Miners came through for the rail crew." Ezra laid a coin and a folded chit on the counter. Otis still owes me for that mule I found him last fall. Figure that covers one bed and a bowl of stew. May turned the chit over, nodded once, then looked at Lila Hart. You his kin? Lila shook her head. Just passing. Well, May said, passing folks still need to sleep. She slid a brass key across. Room 3. Roof leaks near the window. Don't set the lamp too close to the curtain. Lila hesitated before taking it. Her fingers brushed Ezra's for a moment, quick, instinctive, like lightning finding metal. I don't like owing people, she murmured. Ezra leaned an elbow on the counter. You don't. I called in the favor. Not you. That line made May raise an eyebrow, but she said nothing, only nodded toward the hallway. Supper's cooling on the stove. Eat while you can still taste it. The inn was half saloon, half shelter. Laughter rose from the back room where card players hid their loneliness behind smoke. Lila guided Finn to a small table near the window. The boy's boots dangled above the floor. His eyes followed every movement like he was cataloging danger. Ezra stayed standing, arms crossed, the lamplight carving the weariness into his face. You eat, he said. I'll stable your mare. She's got road dust up to her knees. Lila's spoon paused midair. Why help? He met her eyes. Because I can. Because nobody helped me when I needed it. She didn't answer, just went back to eating in slow, silent bites. The stew was thick with salt, pork, and pepper, hot enough to sting the back of her throat. For the first time in days, Finn finished a full bowl. When Ezra returned, his coat smelled of hay and rain. Mare's settled, he said. You'll find soap and a wash basin in the corner. She nodded but kept her distance. The habit of survival sat heavy on her shoulders. She had learned that kindness could be a kind of rope, sweet at first, then tightening. Later, when Finn was asleep under a quilt that smelled faintly of tobacco and lavender, Lila stepped out to the narrow porch. The town beyond was a scatter of lamplight and shadow, wind moving through the telegraph wires like a ghost hum. Ezra was sitting on the steps, rolling a cigarette he hadn't yet lit. You always taken strays? She asked. Only the ones that fight back, he said without looking up. She leaned against the post, arms crossed. You could have walked away back there. He struck the match, flame catching the end of the paper. So could you. For a while they listened to the night, the creak of boards, the low murmur of a coyote far off. You were in the war, she said finally. It wasn't a question. He nodded. Union. Lost my brother at Shiloh. Lost myself somewhere after. War's just another word for men thinking they can fix the world with bullets. Ezra blew smoke toward the streetlight. You got a better word? Work, she said. The kind that builds something, not the kind that burns. He studied her a long moment. The kind of look that doesn't demand, only recognizes. That's so? I've been moving too long, she said quietly. Maybe that's what running costs you forget what stillness feels like. Ezra tapped ash off the end of his cigarette. Stillness ain't free. You earn it, one honest act at a time. She laughed, soft but real. You sound like a preacher with dust on his boots. Preachers got sermons. I just got calluses. Inside, Finn stirred in his sleep, murmuring something about horses. Lila turned toward the sound instinctively. Mother first, woman second. Ezra rose, setting his hat back on. Get some rest. Morning comes mean around here. When she looked back at him, something shifted just a flicker. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who'd want something back? He smiled, the kind that almost hurts. And what if all I want is to see you and your boy safe? She hesitated, then whispered, Then I won't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything, he said. Just breathe. It's free, for now. As he stepped into the dark, the inn's lantern flickered behind her, haloing her reflection in the glass, tired, fierce, half hopeful. For the first time in years, Lila Hart let the sound of another person's footsteps fade without bracing for what came next. Somewhere in that small act of trust, a seed took root, one that would grow into something she never thought she could build. Belonging. The next morning came soft and gold, the kind of dawn that makes dust look like light. Roosters hadn't bothered yet, but the Oxbow Inn was already breathing, pots clinking, a screen door slapping once, twice. Lila Hart stood barefoot at the wash basin, sleeves rolled, hair twisted into a knot that had fought through too many winds. Steam from the coffee kettle rose beside her, curling like ghost smoke toward the rafters. Finn sat at the corner table, tongue between his teeth as he tried to trace letters on a torn feed sack paper. S-I-R, he whispered, slow and careful. Lila smiled without turning. Looks good. Just don't run off the page, honey. Boundaries matter. May Cantrell waddled in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. You could give my Otis lessons on boundaries, she said with a grin. Coffee smells like heaven in a dirty cup. You roast your own beans? Lila nodded, pouring 2 tin mugs full. Old habit. Tastes like home if you close your eyes and forget where you are. Ezra Cole came through the doorway just then, dusting his hat brim against his thigh. The morning light cut across his shoulders, and for a heartbeat, Lila saw what she hadn't let herself before. The weight a man carries when he's tired of running but hasn't yet learned how to stop. You're early, she said, sliding a mug toward him. Early's cheaper than regret, he answered. Besides, your coffee's the only thing keeping May from throwing me out for that mule debt. May snorted. You can stay till that mule learns to pay rent. She shuffled out laughing, leaving the 3 of them with the hum of a waking town behind the walls. Finn pushed his paper toward Ezra. Look, sir, I wrote it right this time. Ezra crouched beside him, eyes soft. You sure did. That's a fine word to learn first. Lila caught that look the one men gave when they'd been emptied out by life, but still found room for wonder. She turned away before it could reach her. After breakfast, Ezra headed to the barn to help Otis fix a warped hinge. Lila followed with a bucket of soap and a stubborn mule named Sadie who refused to be tied. You're good with creatures that kick, Ezra said, hammering the hinge. Spent most of my life around men, she replied dryly. He barked a low laugh, one of those rare sounds that made the air feel easier. Fair point. By noon, the sun had burned the frost off the fences. Finn had taken to sweeping the porch, occasionally pausing to study a map pinned beside the door, a worn sketch of Dry Creek Valley, veins of blue pencil tracing the old wells and riverbeds. What's that? He asked. That's the land trying to talk sense, Ezra said, wiping his brow. Otis and me've been marking water veins. Half this county forgets where the ground still breathes. Lila leaned over the boy's shoulder. My brother used to say rivers are just promises the earth keeps. You can lose sight of them, but they keep moving underneath. Ezra looked up. You had a brother? Had, she said quietly. Nathan. Fever took him when I was 15. She brushed her thumb along the faded blue line on the map. He'd have liked this. Believed water connects everything that's alive. Ezra studied her face for a long moment. Sounds like he was right. The boy's finger traced the curving ink line. Could we find more? For the town? Lila and Ezra exchanged a glance, surprised, proud. Maybe, she said. If you help me learn the ground's language. Finn nodded solemnly, like he'd just been given a secret. That afternoon, while the men repaired fence rails and May baked bread for the dinner crowd, Lila sat outside with a piece of charcoal, copying the map onto a new sheet. She added not just rivers but names. Kindness, work, freedom. Words she whispered more than wrote. The breeze tugged the corner of the page, and she pressed it flat with her palm, as if holding the world steady for once. Ezra came up behind her. Cartographer now? Just trying to remember where things still flow, she said. He looked down at the rough map. You drew this for the town or for yourself? For both. Maybe if they see the lines, they'll know we're connected whether we like it or not. That's a dangerous thing to believe around here, he said softly. She looked up at him, eyes catching the last of the light. So's hope. For a while they stood like that, watching the sky lean toward amber, the kind of quiet that feels like understanding. When May rang the dinner bell, Finn ran in shouting for stew. Ezra stayed behind, hands in his pockets. You know, he said, folks like you don't come through Dry Creek often. Most pass through. Don't even look back. Lila folded her map, tucking it into her apron. Maybe I'm learning to look where I stand first. He nodded once. That's how staying starts. As twilight spread its long shadows across the porch, Lila realized something strange. For the first time in years, she wasn't counting exits, she was marking places worth returning to. The world hadn't changed. But the air felt lighter, the town quieter, as if both had decided to take one cautious breath together. By late afternoon, the sky over Dry Creek had that tin-lid shine it gets before wind changes. The Oxbow's porch was crowded, three-card men resting their elbows, May shelling peas into a dented bowl, Otis scribbling numbers in a ledger that never added up the same way twice. Finn and two other town kids chased each other around the hitching post until Lila told them to settle before someone broke an ankle they couldn't afford. Ezra stood near the map tacked to the wall, tracing the blue pencil lines with the back of a knuckle the way a man reads a prayer he hasn't decided to say out loud. That was when the riders came in. Two Pinkerton agents in dust, black coats, and a foreman from the Northern and Continental, with a brass rule peeking from his pocket like a warrant. They didn't tie their horses, just let them stand hot and impatient as the men clanked up the steps. The foreman removed his hat with that politeness men wear when they plan to take something. "Afternoon," he said. "Name's Wentworth, survey boss for the N&C. This here's company business." He handed Otis a folded paper pressed with red wax. May stopped shelling. Peas pattered into the bowl like rain that refused to bless. Otis broke the seal with a fingernail gone black from hammer work and read the notice, lips moving. He blinked hard, read it again, then looked at Ezra, then at the town like a man who'd found a snake in his boot and wasn't sure whether to move. "It says the main well is to be closed," he said, voice thin, "temporarily, for safety inspections while they set grade for the new spur line." "Temporarily," Wentworth repeated, as if the word were mercy. The taller Pinkerton thin mustache, eyes like dry nails, stepped closer to the map. "These markings yours?" he asked Ezra. "Towns," Ezra said. "Anyone with a pencil has a right to remember where water runs." The agent's mouth tilted like he wanted to smile and couldn't find the habit. "Companies acquired first rights to water adjacent to the proposed spur under the development clause of 81. That includes usage from wells within a designated buffer. This one's in the buffer. That well keeps 27 folks upright and honest," May said, rising. "Plus my dishwater and the bread I sell to your men when they trudge in broke and starving." Wentworth nodded as if he were listening to weather. "Company will provide carts during the inspection period. 2 trips a day from the river. Minimal inconvenience." Ezra's jaw tightened. Lila stepped forward before he could open his mouth. "And who drinks first when your carts run light?" she asked. "Company men or our kids?" The shorter Pinkerton glanced at his ledger. "You a resident, ma'am?" "Passing," Lila said. "Like your law." The taller agent shifted, scanning her torn sleeve, the boy at her hip, the knife hilt she no longer bothered to hide. "We've also received complaints of a disturbance last night," he said. 3 miners claim they were coerced into signing a document under threat of harm. They say a woman brandished a blade and a man abetted. Ezra didn't move. Lila felt Finn pressed tighter to her, small heartbeat jumping like a fish trying to stay in water. "Those miners put hands on a child," she said. "They signed an apology for that." The agent's eyebrow barely twitched. "I don't see that apology here." May marched to the notice post where the paper still fluttered and slapped it with a flour-dusted palm. "You blind or stubborn?" "It's right there, where decent people can read it." Wentworth cleared his throat. He produced a hammer from nowhere like a magician and a roll of sealing tape the color of old blood. He walked to the wellhead, and the crowd moved with him as if pulled by a rope no one wanted. He set the tape across the crank handle, pressed the wax seal, and struck it with a steel stamp that said N&C in letters big as the law of Moses. The sound rang off wood and ribs. "Until completion of inspection," he said again. "Likely a week, maybe 2. Otis swallowed. 2 weeks is a lot of thirst. The tall Pinkerton faced Ezra like men face a fence they plan to climb. "You Cole?" he asked. "I've heard the name. War record. Good with a gun when it counts." "I'm good at other things when they count more," Ezra said. "Fixing hinges. Keeping boys from shaking when men act wrong." The agent's gaze flicked to Finn and back. "Keep them from shaking now. This isn't a saloon scuffle. It's federal contract work. Folks itching to stir towns against the rail find their lives narrowing." Ezra's voice stayed even. "Seems to me a contract's only as holy as the people who keep it." "Careful," the agent said. "Careful is what keeps folks alive," Ezra replied. "It's not the same thing as quiet." Lila could feel the town heat up behind her, breath roughening, boots adjusting. the way people get when they're one more insult away from making a mistake they can't afford. She stepped to the well and planted her palm on the cool iron. What happens if a child falls sick while you're inspecting? Wentworth gave her the kind of smile men give to problems they believe will end themselves. Company doctors at the South Camp. 2 miles. Water is free in the carts, you'll manage. He looked past her at Ezra. And Mr. Cole, our foreman, says he could use a man with your reputation. Pays steady. If you want to be useful, you come see me. The invitation clanged like a trap. Ezra didn't even look at it. I'm already useful, he said. Here. After they rode off, the streets swallowed their dust and left a taste like pennies. The crowd held their breath until they were gone, then let it out ragged. May swore, a word that would have made her first husband blush. Cart's my foot, she said. Those men can't count to 2 trips on a sober day. Otis rubbed his forehead. We've got barrels, but not near enough. River's down. 2 weeks, Lord help us. A ranch hand spoke from the edge of the group. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's just inspection. Rails bring work, work brings money. And money buys water when they sell yours back to you, Lila said. Not unkind, just steady. That's not work. That's a leash. She looked to the map, to the pale blue pencil lines she and Ezra had traced, and Finn had memorized like scripture. We find rain before we find begging, she said. We stretch canvas, rig gutters, barrel every drop we can. Otis, what do you have in the shed? He blinked as if she'd asked the shed to answer. Old wagon covers, a coil of rope, half a crate of tin cups. Cups are a start, May said, but you can't drink from an idea. Ezra ran his thumb along the seal, not hard, only enough to feel the certainty of it. We can rig a temporary catch off the tavern roof, he said. 2 barrels by dusk, more by tomorrow. He glanced at Lila. You know the knots? My brother taught me, she said. He said rain's just the sky paying its debts. Folks, May said, clapping her hands once, the way commanders do when the ground's about to give. We're not waiting on carts like sinners waiting on grace. Boone, go fetch your saw. Ellie, bring those burlap sacks from the store. Finn, you mind that edge, you hear? Finn nodded solemn as a judge. He looked up at the sealed crank, then at Ezra. Sir, he whispered, little voice still finding courage, what if the river carts don't come? Then we make our own river, Ezra said. The boy's eyes went wide, the kind of wide that says belief just learned to walk. Word travels fast in poor towns. By sundown, folks who didn't know the oxbow a dime still came to lift barrels, lash rope, haul crates. Lila climbed the porch roof with a carpenter's caution. Ezra at the foot of the ladder keeping it steady with his weight, and that quiet glance he had that told a person she could test herself and not die of it. They measured with rough eyes, cut with dull blades, bled only a little. When May asked where to set the first barrel, Lila pointed under the corner where drip lines converge. There, she said, work with the way water wants to move. As they worked, whispers braided themselves through the crowd, some about the inspection, some about the miners who'd posted apologies they could no longer read because the rail notice covered half the town bulletin like a greedy hand. Someone said a crew had been heard packing powder by the east, cut just a little blast to see how the shale sets. The rumor moved like a shadow across faces. Ezra's eyes went to the ridge. Lila's jaw tightened. Blasting near a vein could knock mud into a clean well without a man ever laying a shovel on it. Maybe Wentworth's inspection was a prelude to calling every bucket dirty. They set the last lash at full dark. The barrel took the moonlight like a held breath. Otis stood there with his hat in both hands. If this holds, he said, voice small, we might make it to Sunday. Sunday's 6 days, May said. 6 days is 2 weeks if you learn to share. She turned to Lila. You got a gift for bossing men I ain't seen in a while. Lila shrugged, throat thick. I just hate watching thirsty folks pretend it's weather's fault. Ezra came up beside her, not too close, not far. You stood them down today, he said. Not with a blade, just your backbone. She kept her eyes on the barrel. Backbone's just what's left when running quits working. Running ever work? For a mile, she said. Maybe 2. Somewhere beyond town, thunder finally bothered to arrive, a low, promising roll that made heads tilt in the same direction. Wind slipped cool fingers under the canvas. The ropes creaked like old men getting up to dance. Finn grinned at the sky as if he'd bargained it himself. Wentworth and his men would sleep dry in their survey tents with a map that forgot people lived between lines. Here, on this splintered porch, a different map had been pinned. Gutters and barrels, patience and rope, the arithmetic of enough. The first 3 drops hit the tin with the sound of small coins in a poor man's hand. Lila didn't smile, not all the way. She just set her palm on the barrel's rim and felt the wood hum under it. Ezra watched her, how she didn't ask permission to hope, how she didn't apologize for it either. Behind them, the railroad seal shone dull in the lantern light, a red eye that promised more trouble. But for the length of a held breath, Dry Creek remembered water could still choose people over paper. And that knowledge, thin as it was, felt like pressure turning into purpose. The rain came hard that night, sudden and merciless. It drummed against the oxbow's patched roof, rattled the barrels they'd lashed with half-rotten rope, sang down the gutters like a hymn sung by the half-believing. For a few hours, every sound in Dry Creek was water-soft, relentless, forgiving. At dawn, May kicked the back door open with her hip and stood barefoot on the porch, her apron soaked to the knees. "We did it," she hollered. "Every barrel's near full." Her laugh startled the chickens into flapping. People stumbled from their rooms, blinking, smiling. For once, joy arrived before coffee. Ezra stepped out of the barn, wiping rain from his beard, boots sinking in mud that smelled alive again. Finn came running, hair plastered, eyes bright. "It worked, sir. We caught the sky." Ezra crouched and ruffled the boy's head. "Then we owe the clouds a thank you." Lila came out last, a blanket around her shoulders, watching the town turn human again. Her hands were cracked from rope and cold, but she looked younger somehow, as if belief were a kind of balm. That's when the shouting started. A ranch hand from the East Ridge came tearing down the road on horseback, yelling before his boots even hit the ground. "The main well, she's gone foul." Everything stopped. May's laughter died mid-echo. "What do you mean, foul?" Ezra asked. "Like mud," the man gasped. "Like somebody stirred the bottom, smells of oil and rot. Water's ruin clear to the bucket." They all ran, Lila, Ezra, May, half the town. When they reached the well, the truth was worse than rumor. The bucket came up thick and brown, sludge dripping down the rope, the stink of sulfur cutting through the dawn. The wax seal was broken clean, and the iron crank still warm from recent use. Ezra knelt, dipped his fingers in the sludge, rubbed it between thumb and forefinger. "Blasting residue," he muttered. "Powder and clay." May crossed herself. "Those railroad bastards," she whispered. Otis bent beside him, eyes wide. "They must have blasted the east cut. It's too close." Shockwave pushed sediment up the vein. Ezra wiped his hand on his coat. "That's no accident." Lila's voice was low, steady. "They needed the well to die so they could call it unsafe." Around them, people murmured in disbelief. The realization rolled through the crowd like a slow burn. The company hadn't just taken the well, they'd dirtied it, then named it Progress. Ezra looked at Lila, and in that glance something passed between them: rage, yes, but also resolve. "We can't clean it," he said. "Not fast enough." Lila knelt beside the rim, eyes narrowing as she stared into the dark mouth. "Then we build new." May barked a humorless laugh. "With what? Buckets and prayer?" "No," Lila said, rising. With this, she pulled a small, weather-stained parcel from her satchel, a bundle wrapped in oilcloth and tied with cord. Inside were folded papers, edges soft with age. "My brother Nathan's drawings," she said quietly. "He was going to build a system for the farms back in Missouri. Rain channels, storage troughs, filter stones. Said every storm carries the blueprint for the next drought." She laid the sketches on the ground. Lines of graphite traced a network of gutters, tanks, and a central cistern carved into slope. Ezra crouched beside her, studying them. "You trust these plans?" "I trust the man who drew them," she said. "He didn't live long enough to see them built. Maybe we can." Ezra rubbed a thumb along one torn corner, his voice thoughtful. "It's not impossible. Hard, but not impossible." He glanced toward the ridge. "We'll need lumber, canvas, nails, and enough hands to keep working through the night." May stepped forward, face set. "You got mine." Otis grunted. "And mine. I'm too old to be scared." The others began to nod, quiet, unsure, but willing. Lila looked to Ezra. You still allergic to debts? He smiled faintly. Only the kind that chain a man. Buildings different. They worked until their shadows disappeared into the dirt. Ezra hauled beams from the barn, cut them down with precise rhythmic strokes. Lila measured angles by starlight, marking wood with the side of a nail. Finn fetched tools, his small hands slick with rain. Each sound, the hammer's thud, the rasp of saw teeth, the hiss of breath through grit became a kind of prayer. Work as redemption. By midnight, the skeleton of the new cistern stood behind the oxbow, an ugly, beautiful thing of planks and ropes and human stubbornness. The barrels they'd filled were already feeding into it through makeshift gutters. Water poured down steady, clearer than anyone expected. When Lila tested it, the flow hit her palms cool and sweet. She closed her eyes. He was right, she whispered. The sky does pay its debts. Ezra stood behind her, shirt clinging to his shoulders, sawdust mixed with rain. Looks like you paid yours too. She turned, meeting his gaze. Don't make me into something noble. I'm just tired of men breaking what they don't drink from. That's noble enough, he said softly. For a long time, neither spoke. Around them, Dry Creek buzzed with exhausted relief. May passed mugs of coffee laced with sugar someone had hidden for winter. Otis tuned a battered fiddle and scraped a few notes into the wet air. They didn't sound good, but they sounded alive. Then, just when laughter began to rise again, a new sound came from the ridge. A deep, distant crack, followed by the hollow thud of collapsing earth. Every head turned. A dust plume climbed into the night, orange at the base where lanterns flickered in the rail camp. Ezra's jaw locked. They're still blasting. Lila felt her stomach drop. After this rain, they'll bring the whole slope down. We need proof, Ezra said. Something that shows they caused the damage. Lila looked back at the murky well, the sludge drying into clay. You'll never get proof they didn't make vanish. Then we make something they can't. She frowned. What's that? Community, he said simply. They can't take what enough hands decide to hold. Lila almost laughed, half in disbelief. You think that's stronger than paper? He nodded. Paper burns. People remember. A gust of wind swept through, carrying the scent of wet cedar and smoke from the distant blasts. Finn stirred beside the barrels, wrapped in a blanket too big for him. Lila went to adjust it, tucking the edges under his chin. The boy opened one eye. Is it over, Ma? She hesitated, then brushed his hair back. No, honey. It's just beginning. Ezra heard her, and something in his chest eased not hope exactly, but direction. When dawn crept in pale and new, the cistern held more than water. It held proof that survival could look like defiance without hate. The barrels gleamed, seams damp but strong. Children filled cups and passed them around. For the first time, water in Dry Creek tasted like belonging. Ezra climbed the porch steps, boots heavy with mud, and found Lila already there with Nathan's plan spread across her lap, edges weighted by stones. She looked up at him, eyes ringed with exhaustion but bright inside. I want to finish it, she said. Not for me, for them. He nodded, sitting beside her. Then we build until there's nothing left to steal. She let out a slow breath, half sigh, half promise. Don't fall in love with me, she said again, almost teasing, almost afraid. He leaned back, watching the sunrise bleed over the ridges. Too late, he said quietly. Already did back when you told the sky what to do. Lila smiled this time, real and tired and earned. Then maybe stay till it listens. The light caught the wet planks, and the whole valley glowed, as if remembering what mercy looked like when it was built by hand. By the end of that week, Dry Creek was half tired, half reborn. The rain barrels stood like fat soldiers behind every house. Gutters gleamed silver with new seams. The oxbow cistern held enough to drink, wash, and remember what it felt like to rely on something built by human hands instead of company pity. But the railroad men didn't leave. They pitched new tents along the East Ridge, and by Friday, a freight wagon rolled into town carrying another notice, this one bigger, printed proper, the kind of paper that smells of ink and authority. The driver hammered it straight onto the community board, right over the torn apology the miners had once signed. Notice of property claim. Under the charter of the Northern and Continental Rail Company, All water rights, natural or engineered, within 1 mile of the surveyed grade are hereby transferred to company stewardship. It was signed by Augustus Wentworth, stamped in red wax, and sealed with arrogance. When the hammer fell, every head in the street turned. May Cantrell dropped her flour sack right in the dirt. Otis stopped mid-sentence. Finn read the word claim out loud, sounding it syllable by syllable like a curse he didn't understand yet. Lila just stared, jaw tight, as the world she'd helped rebuild was declared someone else's again. Ezra tore the notice down, folded it once, twice, until the red wax cracked. Then he looked at the townsfolk. "We're done letting paper talk louder than people," he said. "Tomorrow, we stand in the square." By morning, word had traveled the valley. Farmers rode in from a mile out. Women carried empty buckets as banners. Children perched on barrels like sentinels. May brought her bread. Otis brought his old war bugle, cracked at the seam but still proud. Even the miners, the same ones who'd once sneered, came back with clean shirts and the look of men trying to start again. Wentworth arrived near noon, flanked by 2 Pinkertons. His coat was immaculate, boots spotless, like he'd polished them with the town's patience. "You folks holding a meeting?" he asked. Lila stepped forward, skirts dusty, chin high. "A reading," she said, "of the law you keep forgetting." Ezra unfolded a thin, weathered book, Otis Cantrell's copy of the Western Settlement Code, 1879. Its pages yellowed, corners bent. "Section 5, he said, his voice carrying clear across the square. "Any well or catchment serving 10 or more dwellings within a shared settlement is exempt from private seizure under any commercial charter." Wentworth blinked, the way men do when someone quotes rules they assume nobody could read. "That statute was repealed," he said quickly. "Show it," Ezra replied. The foreman hesitated. One of the Pinkertons reached for his satchel, shuffled papers, frowned. "Ain't repealed," he muttered under his breath. Lila's voice cut through the murmurs. "Then this town's water is ours. Built with our hands, on our roofs, from the sky. You can't own rain, Mr. Wentworth. You can only wait for it." A ripple of sound moved through the crowd. Agreement, relief, the beginning of something larger than fear. Wentworth tried to recover. "You people don't understand progress. The railroad's coming, whether you like it or not." "Progress?" May snapped. "You mean taking what ain't yours and calling it a timetable?" Ezra's tone stayed calm. "You'll lay your tracks. We'll live our lives. But you don't own what falls from heaven or what rises from our labor." The taller Pinkerton stepped forward, hand near his revolver. "Careful now, cowboy." Ezra looked at him, unflinching. "Careful's what built this place. Careful's what keeps a man from shooting his own conscience." The square went still. Then, from somewhere behind the crowd, a hammer struck metal, the sound of someone removing a seal. Heads turned. Finn was at the old well, standing on a crate, tugging at the red wax that still clung to the handle. His small fingers pried until the seal came loose and fell into the dust. The Pinkerton barked, "Hey, kid." But Ezra raised a hand. "Let him finish." Finn looked up, eyes wide but sure. "You said paper burns, right, sir?" Ezra nodded once. Finn struck the edge of the seal against the stone lip. It cracked clean in 2. He dropped the pieces in the dirt. Lila stepped to his side, resting a hand on his shoulder. "That's what accountability looks like, Mr. Wentworth," she said. "Not talk. Action that mends what was broken." The crowd broke into low cheers, first cautious, then swelling. Some clapped, some cried. May blew Otis's old bugle just once, off-key but glorious. Wentworth's face went the color of old milk. He looked at Ezra, then Lila, then the people who no longer looked away from him. "You think you've won," he said, voice tight. "The company always wins." Lila smiled, small and fearless. "Maybe, but not today. And not here." Wentworth hesitated, then turned sharply on his heel. The Pinkertons followed, silent. Their horses kicked dust into the crowd, but nobody stepped back. Dust was familiar. Fear wasn't welcome anymore. That night, the square glowed with lanterns hung from the barrels like festival lights. Water sloshed from one to another as neighbors shared without counting. Lila sat on the porch of the oxbow, a mug of coffee in her hands, watching Finn play marbles with the miners' children. The sound of their laughter carried farther than any sermon. Ezra joined her, boots quiet on the steps. Town held its ground today, he said. She nodded. Not just the town, the idea of it. He smiled. You've got a way of making rebellion sound like common sense. It is, she said. Common sense to feed each other. Common sense to read what someone else signs in your name. Ezra leaned against the post. You know the way you read that law? Scared you? She teased. He shook his head. Made me proud. You turned words into shelter. She looked at him, eyes soft but strong. Don't start falling in love again, Ezra Cole. Too late for that, he said, and this time she didn't argue. They watched as May passed out loaves still warm from her oven, as Otis patched the map with new blue lines, showing where every rooftop gutter fed into the communal cistern. Above them, the sky held the first hint of another storm. Rain's coming back, Lila whispered. Ezra tilted his face toward it. Let it. We've got barrels waiting. In that moment, Dry Creek felt like its own kind of nation, a handful of souls who'd chosen decency over fear, law over silence, and one another over the company's shadow. The barrels creaked as the first drops hit, slow and deliberate, like applause from heaven. The storm rolled in gentle this time, no thunder, no threat. Just the sound of rain returning like an old friend who'd finally learned to knock. It ran off rooftops and along gutters, each drop a soft note in the quiet song Dry Creek had earned. The barrels filled again, slow and sure, wood creaking in gratitude. A week had passed since the standoff. The company men hadn't come back. Word was they'd shifted their line north, where the rock was softer and the people didn't talk back. Life settled into something new, not easy, but honest. The town learned the rhythm of sharing, the mathematics of enough. Children fetched water for neighbors. Men mended fences for nothing more than a thank you. May's bread smelled sweeter, maybe because she stopped counting slices before handing them out. And on one bright morning, the square held a different kind of gathering. Ezra Cole stood by the well clean now, pumping clear again after a week of rain and hard work. He'd shaved for the occasion, though the stubble had already started to return by afternoon. His shirt was pressed as best as a man could manage without an iron, and his boots were clean except for the honest dust that comes from living. Beside him, Lila Hart smoothed the hem of her blue dress, the one May had patched from leftover curtain fabric. It wasn't new, but it fit her like something she'd grown into, not borrowed. Finn stood between them, holding a bouquet of lavender sprigs tied with twine flowers she'd planted behind the inn and watched bloom too soon, like all good things that can't wait. May Cantrell officiated, because nobody trusted the traveling preacher and she'd once married a man on a dare, so she figured she was qualified. Otis stood beside her, holding the town's Bible, its spine cracked, its pages thin from years of being opened only when people needed to start over. All right, May said, hands on her hips. We're here to make official what's already been true since that first night you two looked at each other like folks who'd seen too much storm to mistake calm for boredom. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Ezra rubbed the back of his neck. Lila smiled without hiding it. May flipped open the Bible to no particular page and squinted at the words. Now, I could read scripture, she said, but I think Dry Creek wrote its own. You built this town back with barrels and rope, not promises. You fought a company with patience, not pistols. If that ain't holy, I don't know what is. She turned to Lila. You still want this man who can't keep his boots clean? Lila met Ezra's eyes. I do. He listens more than he speaks, and that's rarer than gold. And you, Ezra Cole? May said. You ready to love a woman who'll outwork, outtalk, and outstare you? Ezra smiled, slow and true. I already do. Every day. May slapped the Bible shut. Then by the power vested in common sense and coffee, I declare you married. The cheer that rose wasn't loud, but it carried far. Finn whooped the loudest, running to wrap his arms around them both. Ezra crouched to meet him halfway. You all right with this, son? Finn nodded hard. You fix things, sir. She trusts you. That's enough. Lila's hand found Ezra's shoulder. He's right. The three of them stood there for a moment. A small family in a world that had tried hard to break such things. Behind them, the barrels overflowed, water spilling onto the packed earth clear, clean, unstoppable. Later that evening, the celebration unfolded like a handmade quilt, mismatched, stitched from kindness. Someone played a fiddle half in tune, May passed around sweet cider, and the miners, now farmers in their hearts, hung lanterns from the railings. Ezra danced once, stiff but earnest. Lila laughed, loud and unguarded. It was the kind of laughter that made the air lighter for everyone else. When the music faded, they found themselves back by the rain barrels. The lavender bouquet floated in one, petals circling slow. Lila leaned against the wood, arms folded. I never thought staying would feel like freedom. Ezra touched the rim beside her hand. Freedom's just another word for choosing the same people twice. She smiled. And if I forget? He looked at her with that quiet steadiness she'd come to trust. Then I'll remind you, every morning, before the coffee burns. Finn's voice called from inside. Ma, they want you to see the rainbow. She turned toward the sound, but before she went, she pressed her palm to Ezra's chest. You still allergic to debts? He shook his head. Only the kind that keep me from staying. She rose on her toes, kissed him slow, and certain the kind of kiss that doesn't ask for forever, only the next sunrise. Above them, the sky broke open into color, sunlight, and rain weaving together in the space between storms. The barrels caught every drop that fell, the water rippling around the lavender stems like it knew how hard people had worked to deserve peace. May called out from the porch, "Come eat before the pie cools." Lila laughed. You heard her. She reached for Ezra's hand. Come on, husband. He followed, the sound of their boots in rhythm with the rain easing into earth. Behind them, the barrels stood full, the lavender swaying in the breeze, scent lifting into the clean air a promise that would keep long after the thunder forgot their names. They say the desert forgets, but not this time. In Dry Creek, the rain learned new names, Ezra, Lila, Finn, and stayed a while. A woman who once ran found peace in the sound of barrels filling. A man who'd lost too much learned that building is the purest kind of prayer. Maybe that's all the West ever asked of us, to keep trying, to keep choosing each other, even when the world writes its rules in red wax and dust. If this story found a quiet place in you tonight, leave a word below. Tell me, what does home mean to you now? And stay a while. The next tale's already riding in.